Expanding Mind with Erik Davis, Thursdays at 2 p.m. on the Progressive Radio Network.
Welcome, friends, to another edition of Expanding Mind. I'm your host, Erik Davis, continuing our adventures in the realms of consciousness, the cultures of consciousness. You know, one of the many interesting things about being alive today, we are definitely all experiencing that marvelous Chinese curse of living in interesting times, is how intensely generational our experiences of technology are. That I'm in graduate school, I'm sitting in classes with people who grew up surrounded by the internet, basically. Maybe not when they were babies, but when they were 3 or 4, there was probably an internet portal in their home somewhere. Whereas I can still remember when I was about 10 years old, visiting a friend and seeing like his older brother was a sci-fi geek computer programmer guy, and he had an Altair, and he showed me how it worked and how you could like store the bits on this little tape drive, and he was really into Star Trek, and he stayed in his room all the time with the little shades drawn. He was a very curious character, and now he's some like genius programmer in Germany working on like security systems and things like that. And, I remember, taking early programming classes in high school where we learned BASIC and, worked with these, clunky machines and, all this sort of thing. I won't go down memory lane anymore. But it is really fascinating because you can feel the kind of, your age is very implicated in your sense of like what technology is, how things have changed, what the possibilities are, how comfortable it looks. Things that people take for granted now still seem extremely strange to me. I, for one, am incredibly grateful that I grew up before the world of cell phones. I'm so glad I was a teenager without cell phones. I very much pity our lads and lasses of today, and at the same time, I'm amazed at the opportunity and the facility that I see young people have with this technology that they've grown up around. Anyway, all these sort of thoughts were stirred up in my head when I was thinking about what this conversation today with Douglas Rushkoff, who's just published a new book, Program or Be Programmed. And Doug's probably roughly my age, and he talks about some of the same kinds of experiences in his book, but it's not a book of memoir, but really a very incredibly well targeted and accessible and insightful sort of book of suggestions, of helps, of pointers to develop the kinds of ethics and attitudes that he thinks and I also agree, we really need if we're going to not be swamped by all this stuff as we, to some degree, already are. But before I bring Doug on, I just want to introduce, of course, our co-host, Maja Daou. Maja, how you doing today? Maja, are you there?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
There. I can hear you now.
Oh, okay, good. I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. You recently. I was asking. You moved recently, and you don't have internet in your home. That's true.
Yeah, I go in and out of being pretty ludditical. I have no internet right now. For years, I didn't get a cell phone, and I didn't drive a car. I mean, I get pretty primitive, and I kind of go in and out of staying away from computers. But for a long time, I, of course, used the internet for research, and would go off into these little trails and get very involved in the kind of cyber world and go into that and Facebook and everything. But right now, I have totally, gotten out of that, so I've just been actually listening to records way more than being involved in digital stuff, and I've just gone totally
how do you
analog.
feel how would you say, how does it feel different, or when you look at the other people, your friends' lives or whatever, do you sense this big difference?
I really kind of do. I mean, there's a lot more space in my brain that has opened up as a result of no internet.
Well, I like the metaphor of opening up, because that's one thing that Doug Rushkoff has been doing since he started writing about internet culture and new media culture way back in the early 90s. I remember Siberia first came out. I was like the ideal reader of his early explorations, and he's been writing and coming up with creative concepts and working in ways focusing on the business side, on the culture side, on the political side, and it's just wonderful to have him on the show. So, Doug, thanks for joining us here on Expanding Mind.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's good to be with you both. Yeah,
it's good to hear you again. I haven't talked to you for a while. So you crank out books like a monster. I'm utterly amazed, and some of them are extremely intensely researched and full of deep thinking about history and economics. Your book before this one, Life Inc., was a very thick, if very accessible read. And the new one, Programmed to be Programmed, is a more slim, targeted volume. And I'm just curious what motivated you to write a book that takes the form of like the 10 commands, has 10 commands for digital age. There's 10 wonderful ethical principles, rules concepts to live by. And so what was it about now that made you want to write a book that could enter in on that level?
Oh, it's weird. I wrote, Siberia like 20 years ago, and it's really my only cyber book, my only book that's explicitly about the possibilities opened up by digital technology. I drank the Kool-Aid in the late 80s, I guess, and saw the entire world differently, and wanted to write about that then. And then I really, over the next 10, 12 books, I really just applied that insight to other areas. I applied it to media, I applied it to Judaism, I applied it to business, applied it in that Life Inc. book, really to economics, saying, oh my gosh, economics is closed source and it used to be open source. How did that happen? But then I realized, that sadly, that people using these technologies were these days no more likely to have had this insight than people who aren't. And everybody's using them and nobody gets it. So, when I first got on computers, it was as if I dropped acid. It was that big a shift in the way I looked at reality. And now I see people using them and they see the same old reality that they saw before, or less of it even. It's not that rather than opening a window, window's closed. So I wanted to write a book, kind of like asking, what would McLuhan write if he were alive? How would he look at digital technology? What is the way I can help people get back on the other side of the screen and see that computers are anything machines, and that this is way more easy to understand than they believe. And I thought the way to do that was really in a nice, simple, little, 1 or 2 hour read of a book, which is all people really have patience for these days. And also to help people understand that what just happened is as big as what happened to the Israelites with the invention of text, that this is as big as the axial age shift from an oral culture to a literate culture, that now we're going from a literate culture to a digital culture. So by coming up with 10 commands, it was as if I'm saying, well, look, we need something as big as Torah to happen right now in order for us to guide ourselves on in this very new terrain. Except instead of commandments that people have to follow, I'm giving people commands that they can actually use. It's commands that give them command of this new realm.
Well, that seems to be one of the things that's really challenging about this realm, is the way that it's changed the time and space of reaction or of action that in earlier eras, when there was still a lot of information, there was a lot of change, there was a lot of chaos and complexity, there was still a kind of a certain slowness of most situations in terms of the way people process media, in terms of the way people processed ideas, that there was sort of more room for reflection or cogitation or critical thinking, if you will. And while this can seem it can be overstated, it does seem that just the nature of things now, the number of inputs that we have, the speed with which people respond, get used to responding, and they get habituated to, whether it's neurological or cultural, however you want to frame it, that it's very hard to even find the place to kind of intervene in one's own life, let alone thinking about how one creates guidelines or ideas or suggestions that can penetrate the way people are process this stuff today.
Yeah, I mean, it's as if, we look at the past, the older universe of kind of command and control and top-down organization. We look at that as sort of the era of call and response. And we think of communication that it sort of happened in that way, and that now we're in the land of sort of instantaneous connection. When in reality, we're still living by call and response. We're human beings. You can't talk and hear at the same time. You can only flip back and forth really quickly between things. You can't genuinely multitask. You can do different things. You can resequence, or you can do things in shorter sequences. But, we still do take something in and process it and then output it. But we're trying to do it at a speed that doesn't really even work with the technology. The beauty of the early internet, I know you were back there, on the well and some of these bulletin boards, was that you had all the time in the world. The wonderful thing about email over phone was that you could answer it in your own time. You get to it when you want to. Now that people attach these things to their bodies, there's almost this expectation that email is like an SMS or something. You're supposed to just respond. So then the act of responding has become more important than whatever's in the response. It's just the ping back. If you don't ping back immediately, you've communicated, a lot more to the person than if you take the time to actually say something real. And
it's remarkable how tactile that's become. That the act of, pressing a button on a computer monitor, sending somebody a communication who's 1,000 miles away, feels as much like giving them a little pat on the back or smiling at them as it is about communicating some set of, some points or some bit of information.
Yeah, well, the awful
like
part
people
about
are like kind of tingling all the time, literally with the vibrating thing. It's really remarkable.
Yeah, but in order to agree with someone, in order to activate somebody's mirror neurons, the parts of their brain that understand they're being agreed with, you have to take a positive, effortful action. You have to email back, yay, exclamation point, smiley, good. In real life, when you have rapport with somebody, you do those things unconsciously. Your irises widen, your head nods, your breathing, moves into sync with them. All the stuff that neurolinguistic programmers like to exploit. But your body naturally gives the cues that now you have to do intentionally. So we end up, because we don't get those cues in the internet space, because the 93% of human communication that's nonverbal is left out of our internet communication. Even the video, you don't really see. You can't see their breathing. You can't see their irises. Because that's left out, you're actually left feeling unattended to, feeling unloved, unagreed with. You don't develop rapport even though you've spent the same amount of time with the person, and then you're going to naturally begin to assume, well, that person doesn't actually like me. And the ideas that you have, the great ideas you have, are not going to be reinforced and developed in your own brain because you're not getting the sort of the evolutionary social cues that the rest of the human organism really does want you to keep going in that direction.
Yeah, it's really amazing. That was one of the things I got from your book really strongly was the loss of these sort of extra verbal, extra informational, or at least different kinds of informational cues, and really a sense of the poverty that comes to not in using those things, because they can be used intelligently, and we can balance them with other kinds of communications and embed them in richer local social practices, etc. But it's more the fact that we forget, that we don't even recognize how impoverished our communication and our responses are. And the analogy that you really run with in the book, probably a little farther than I would, but still I'm very much in sync with your thinking about this, is, the MP3. And like people, especially younger people who grew up on digital files, they think that MP3s are like listening to a proper vinyl recording. You just don't get as much information physically. That changes. The space is different. The way that it's encoded, the whole idea of encoding is not really applicable to analog recordings, and it's a significant difference. And yet it's a difference that you and I can recognize, but a lot of kids, they don't even hear it. So I'm curious partly how you balance the fact that you are of a certain generation, that you do have these memories of a different kind of internet, and that in some ways, for somebody younger now, they're like, "Hey man, you're old. You can't understand this anymore. You're just being grumpy." Do you wrestle with that?
Not really. I mean, I used to take their side. I mean, in the early 90s, I wrote a book called Playing the Future, which basically said, look, these are kids, these are digital natives, and we're immigrants, so they're always going to understand it better like natives. They're in it, so they're going to get it. And all the stuff that we're having trouble with, they're not going to have trouble with. The thing that concerns me is that it turns out I was wrong. It turns out that young people are worse at using the internet than old people. They make poorer decisions, poorer judgments about what's real and what's not. They have a harder time distinguishing between advertising and editorial. They're more easily fooled by fake offers. They're really moving more blindly through these spaces than we are, which was a shock to me until I realized, and it goes back to your sort of when you were born question. If you were born into the middle of an acid trip, you wouldn't know that there's anything else, right? You would think this is a pre-existing condition of the universe. And the great insight that you gain from an acid trip is because you start at baseline, you get high, then you come back. It's actually the change in consciousness itself which is the sort of the path to learning, which is why, you could have great arguments, with Buddhists about whether it's appropriate to do it all, because it's an enacted shift. You shift and then shift back. But
I don't know about that, because there are people that are born into acid trips and they're schizophrenics, that have that as their constant state of mind. And then they can also be like these incredible artists and authors that change the way that other people think. So
they can
I think
be,
there's a little bit of it too that kind of extends into this other area, which, part of the loss of body things that you can interpret from communicating on the internet, you get things from it too. Like you're able to kind of speak and communicate in a different imaginal language where, I'm sure everybody's had this experience where you'll be having an internet relationship with somebody, whether it's a friend or whatever, and you can communicate things to them purely through your imagination with kind of like no connection to your body at all. So there are ways of communication that are open through the internet too, which you couldn't access otherwise.
No, they do happen, and they're wonderful, and when they happen. And Marshall McLuhan even, he didn't really know about the digital, but when he talked about the electronic age, he said we're moving towards a schizophrenia.
Right.
But then you've got to say, okay, and I'm not talking about good or bad, but okay, if we as a civilization are basically going to move into a schizophrenic state, mass schizophrenia, then there's pros and cons to that, right? So in the schizophrenic state, we're going to be much more likely to fall into deep paranoia, right? So we got to get rid of the nukes really quickly before we turn schizophrenic. We're going to have trouble with continuity, right? Judging from one day to the next what's happened before, and what's happened in the future. We're going to have some trouble distinguishing between what does that person really mean and what am I projecting onto what that person means. Plus just the hallucinations alone are, yes, they're wonderful. James Joyce, I remember when there's a great story about him bringing his daughter to Carl Jung, and because he wanted a diagnosis, and Jung said, your daughter's schizophrenic. And then Joyce said, but I'm concerned. I have the same kinds of visions that she does. And Jung said, yeah, well, you're diving down to these depths, and, she's drowning down there. So if we are going to be schizophrenic, how do we be healthy schizophrenics if we are going to go there? And I would argue that is by maintaining our awareness that the hallucination is of our own making. And that's why I say program or be programmed. As long as we are drawing the hallucination, as long as we're making the picture on the back of the cave and we know we're doing it, then it's all good. But if Rupert Murdoch's going to do it for us, then I've got a real problem with that, especially if we don't even know that we're schizophrenic, if we actually think this is just what is.
Yeah, I mean, it's that question of building kind of distance or rupture into the way we respond. And it's almost the same way that, if you're doing mindfulness practice in a Buddhist framework where, you're doing your daily thing, but you're cultivating the sense of being aware of what's happening, a kind of, not a detachment even, not even like a disinterestedness, but just an awareness of the different responses, of what the thoughts are, of how you're working. And it's almost like cultivating that kind of awareness. I mean, one of the ways that I've been doing with it, because in a lot of ways we've had a very similar track, although on in different dimensions, but where I was very inspired initially and drank the Kool-Aid and was extremely fascinated by virtual reality and the potentials for future civilization, and I loved the early bulletin boards and the well and text-based MUDs, and I had just some of the most, most of my best experiences online happened in the first couple of years of being online personally, just in terms of really informing me or opening up my world. And now I find that I'm a little cranky, and for a while I was feeling like, oh man, you're just getting old, you can't get with it, what happened to the earlier gleam, but then I just realized that my critical understanding of the world was coming to the same sorts of conclusions that you are in terms of the deleterious effects of these things. But also personally, I realized that I just couldn't and didn't want to live there. And at the same time, the kind of attitudes and lifestyles that people who are more, let's call them Luddite, it's not really a fair way of saying it, but people who are really more anti-technology, like I was interested in those ideas. They helped balance my own perspective, but that wasn't my way either. And so where I've wound up now is where I'm constantly kind of aware of how it's irritating. That it's like, oh, God, it's that thing again. Oh, it's that push and pull. And in a way, it's a very difficult place to live. But for me, it's more comfortable than kind of like letting myself go and just being one with like responding to emails all the time or responding to texts all the time. Sometimes I have my cell phone, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I miss things, sometimes I don't. It's kind of a messy, incoherent way, but it keeps a certain space there. And that's something about what I'm getting from your book, is like how to introduce a kind of critical sense of technology, but not in an intellectual way, more in a way of how you actually kind of live and the frameworks that you have when you engage it and trying to create more room for maneuvering.
Right, and just to keep it really simple so that, you just see everybody kind of throwing up their arms and either just sort of diving in whole hog and doing everything high tech, or just going forget it and running screaming from it. So you see, like I write about it in the book, the school in Tennessee that is using, they're having kids log into Second Life into a virtual version of their own classroom while they're in the classroom with each other. It's like, what's that? It's not even a computer class. So why aren't they just being with each other instead of going online to be with each other? And then they put this on the cover of their course catalog as if it's, shows how great they understand technology. So it's really simple things like looking at, what are the biases of the technology? Well, it's biased towards long-distance communication. It's really not good for up-close communication. It's, biased towards asynchronous use of time and not really biased towards real-time interaction. And as you start to understand that, hopefully people can see, oh, well, this is a good time to use this stuff, or this is a good time not to, or look at the way this is being done. I don't like what Facebook is asking me to choose between. I don't actually have to choose either. I don't have to choose at all. And to realize that is hard for some people, especially when they're born into the world where using the thing is default. And I'm just trying to break the default and have people understand that the default ways of using these things are not God's default. They're the default of the programmer or the person paying them. And that if you can start to look critically at the default situations, you will no longer see these technologies as pre-existing conditions of the universe. It took me a while till I was 13 or 14 till I realized TV was just programming. And that they weren't programming the set, they were programming me. And I think it will take us maybe a little bit longer to see that that's the way these spaces work too, that these are not unbiased spaces, but they're all tilted towards one thing or another. All these little things, these annoyances that you notice, some of them are part of the technology, and some of them are programmed into the technology. One man's annoyance is another man's feature. And the other man is the guy usually collecting the money on the other side of the screen.
No, I love that line. It was really funny because somebody was interviewing me recently, and they said, I was talking to Sherry Turkle, who's, been writing about these kinds of matters for a long time. And she was saying how our disappointments with other human beings lead us to project onto technology. And what she was talking about is that we project onto technology the good things and the wonderful things we think that we can't get from human beings anymore because we kind of idolize it, which is, a way people have looked at technology for a long time, and it's still kind of true in some ways. But when I read it, I thought, oh, yeah, totally. I'm like that. I just take all the annoyances that I have with people and I see it writ large in technology. Technology to me is unctuous. It's sort of irritating. It's badgering. It's forcing, it's being judgmental. It's like all these things that I see now. But a lot of it has to do with choice. I mean, I think probably my favorite section in your thing is about choice, and both the needless multiplication of choices, or needless from my perspective and from some people's, but also how there's like a deeper choosing that we're missing by precisely thinking that all of those kinds of choices are working for us. So could you talk about that rule?
To me it feels a little bit like it's kind of like living on a Snap 2 grid, where you can put something on the desktop here or a little bit to the left of it, but when the computer kind of grabs the thing and moves it, just tweaks it over to one side or the other, so it's kind of in a place where it knows where it is. It's like it's got the numbers. You landed in a field, and I very often feel like many of my interactions with software, with digital technology, are asking me to pick one or the other. Is it here? Is it there? What color is this? Is it this orange or that orange? And just the process of making the choice about it, it's not just that it takes away the randomness, but it forces you into one box or another, and it occupies you. It's funny, Clay Shirky, a friend of mine, always talks about the cognitive surplus. I have no cognitive surplus because I'm so busy making all of the choices I'm supposed to make. All the great choices that my technology is giving me. Or then you look at the forced choices of environments like, Facebook. It's like, are you married or single? Are you looking or are you satisfied? Are you male or female? It's like, well, gosh, so many of these things I've experienced as a spectrum, and so many of these choices I've just not made. And the technology creates the illusion that if you're not making the choice, you're not experiencing agency. And that's just that's it. That's not real. As a matter of fact, agency is the freedom not to choose. Agency, just because you're single doesn't mean you haven't exercised your agency. You've exercised your agency to be a single person. It's like you don't have to choose.
Yeah, no, there's often this sense of just being not so much just not only overwhelmed with choices, many of which are trivial, and you can feel the kind of cognitive load, but the sense that there's sort of an ideal subject being created who's the one who knows that it's like, I have the knowledge of what all of my character is, so I can manifest it in this domain and rule. And there's not a sense of reward for ambivalence or ambiguity or fuzziness or a desire to hide, even for masks, for veils. There's a lot of ways in which it forces a very limited kind of subjectivity on it. But we got to take a break right here. You're listening to Expanding Mind on the Progressive Radio Network. We're talking with Douglas Rushkoff about his new book, Program or Be Programmed, and we'll be right back.
You're listening to the Progressive Radio Network, your number one source for progressive commentary.
What will be the impact of the Tea Party on the upcoming midterm elections? Who are these Tea Partiers? Are they really only a bunch of right-wing rednecks? Listen in every Thursday night from 7 until 8 Eastern to A More Perfect Union as your host, Bill Thompson, gets the inside stories from actual Tea Party players. Call in with your comments and questions, challenge guests, or show support. A More Perfect Union. Thursday nights, 7 until 8. Only on ProgressiveRadioNetwork.com.
Hey, did you miss your favorite show? Don't worry, PRN has you covered. Just log on to ProgressiveRadioNetwork.com and go to the archive page where you can choose from any of our great programs. Listen or download shows from yesterday or even ones dating months back. The Progressive Radio Network, striving to make your lives easier.
Hi, this is Dr. Mayor Eisenstein. Every Thursday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, I will be coming to you live on ProgressiveRadioNetwork.com. I will bring my background as a physician and as an attorney to help you with a minimal pharmaceutical and a minimal surgical approach to your medical issues. Please come join me.
So to join in on the conversation, call 888-874-4888. Ask Dr. Eisenstein, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, only on Progressive Radio Network.
Hi, this is Adam Kolker from the Brooklyn Jazz Underground. We're going to be hosting a weekly show every Tuesday at 5 p.m., focusing on sounds coming from the borough of Brooklyn. We'll be playing some new releases, doing live interviews, some live performances, maybe even venture out into music from some of the outer boroughs. Brooklyn Jazz Underground, Tuesday at 5, only on the Progressive Radio Network.
I'm Carol Brouillet, host of Community Currency on Progressive Radio Network every Thursday, 5 to 6 p.m. Please join us as we connect people, ideas, important information, and discover solutions to some of the most urgent problems facing us. Every Thursday, 5 to 6 p.m., Community Currency on Progressive Radio Network.
You're listening to the Progressive Radio Network, your number one source for progressive commentary.
Welcome back to Expanding Mind on the Progressive Radio Network. I'm Maja Daou, and we're here with Erik Davis and Douglas Rushkoff talking about programming and being programmed. And we were just talking about choice before the break, and it's really interesting to me what you bring up in that chapter in your book, because to me there's really a meta implication with binary programming and all those choices you were talking about, because it's forcing us into a totally dualistic world, which, I mean, in alchemy and like every religion, it's about, you know, like unification, getting out of those dualities. And like you said, sometimes it can be as easy as not making a choice or not choosing between the two binary things that are offered to us, not choosing male or female, but choosing the hermaphrodite. And
right.
it's interesting to me how like computers and programming really is a little bit like the alchemical work, right? Where we're kind of like projecting our brain onto this machine, which is the computer, just like an alchemist in a lab working with metals. Maybe you could compare it with that, and that it's about this process of like through the computers, and we're learning how to like get past the binary and maybe get to like an alchemical technology someday. I mean, I hope. And it's interesting because I always really liked the John Lilly book, Metaprogramming the Human Biocomputer. So I like what you say about like starting it in our own brains and how that'll then transfer into the technology. I think that's really true. And I know you outline a lot of things in your book. Is there like a single habit that you could tell folks that are listening that would really help to try and get to like, you know, the not the binary but the singularity of programming that might be helpful for folks?
Well, it's hard to narrow it down. It's really the final command in the book is, you know, is program or be programmed. And I think it has to do with seeing technologies as having intention. You know, the difference between digital technology and all the stuff that went before is digital technologies are embedded with purpose. Not just a bias, like a shovel is maybe biased towards digging, but purpose, but programs. You know, now we have technologies, basically, you know, digital, robotics, nano, and genetics that are all embedded with programs for how they continue on, you know, for how they're going to replicate, how they're going to spread. These are technologies that actually want something. These are technologies that have their own sense of purpose and their own
desire.
Yeah, their own will, if you will, to survive. And when you interact with these technologies, the technologies are learning about you and growing more complex. Are you learning more about them and what they want, or are you just getting something done and leaving? So I look at every interaction with a piece of program technology is a way of learning, what does technology want from me? What does technology want from us? Is this the technology that wants it, the program that wants it, or is it the person who made that program? Did the person who made that program even know what they've just done? Do they understand the life form that they've just released? Because I think our future really is going to be a much more obvious coevolution with technology, where instead of it just being the fact that we can, you know, that we have fire and can cook our food means that we can lose our molars. Now the fire itself is developing alongside us. Our technologies are trying to get more complex. They have the same agenda as biology, which is to increase in complexity and in awareness and consciousness in the face of entropy, which is trying to do the opposite. And technology is now not just our assistant in that, it's our partner in that. And I want human beings to at least go along for the ride. So I do think we have to start looking at it as something more than just a tool.
Yeah, I think one of the places in the book where you touch on some of these things that's a little bit like these sort of alchemical ideas Maj is talking about is when you not even speculate, but really just acknowledge the way that thinking and creating culture itself is fundamentally shifting away from the individual towards a kind of collective experience. And, you know, of course, there's some degree to which that's always been true. You know, I'm in school now, so I'm doing a lot of scholarship, and you recognize the way that scholarship has always been sort of a group mind of books talking to other books and citing other books and things like that. Mm-hmm. But that process is now just, you know, shot into the stratosphere. And I'm really curious about how you think about this possibility, or not this possibility, just the reality of the emergence of certain kinds of group minds, or the way that thinking, or at least information processing can happen in these collective spaces, and the forms of collectivity that seem to be some of the most interesting things that are happening in our moment. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's sort of rough and not so interesting right now, and I mourn for other days in some ways, but in other ways, the kinds of things that people are doing in social spaces, in real spaces, in technological environments that are kind of experimenting with these conditions of collective experience, collective thinking, collective creativity. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, I mean, I look at it all as modeling a new form of behavior. I've never really seen the net or networks as the thing, but as a way of practicing for the thing. So, the loss of privacy or the permanence inherent in your Google groups or your Facebook pages is, in some sense, preparation for a world in which everyone's going to know what you're thinking anyway, because we're all part of some group mind. So I feel like in some ways the net itself is this dry run for whatever the next phase of collective organism is going to be. It's hard to imagine exactly what it's like, but I think it's going to be a slower process than most of us imagine. When we do it through technology, it's always kind of jerky and sudden, and now everyone's on Facebook, and oh my God, what's that? But the Facebook is the temporary part. It's not the Facebook that matters. It's the new ways of relating. And I think that it's important, especially for people like us, who value individual thought and who value the functioning of an individual neural being, to make sure we have time to still live that way. Because right now, because we have so little time and because there's so many things pinging at us, we feel like the network social organism is an invasion of our personal space, of our individual cognition, of our ability to contemplate as individuals or even as small selected groups. And the fact is, just because we have networked organism does not mean we can't have individual organism and small groups. It's not elitist to say, I just want to hang out with these 6 people right now in my house, or I just want to be alone right now and think this thing out. It
actually, these days it seems kind of avant-garde.
It is. It's avant-garde because you're not, you don't have a blog about that? Wait a minute, Doug, I get all these, your comments are off. What happened? Your comments are off. I turned them off that one. I didn't want people talking about that. I said what I wanted to say. I don't care what they have to say. What do you mean you don't care what they have to say? As if it's politically incorrect to not have comments on, and then to not have people be able to post anonymously. I'm like, well, screw it. I just don't want that. I just don't want that now. I thought this is about choice. It's like women's lib saying that now a woman's not allowed to take care of her kid. It's like, no, you're allowed to do whatever the heck you want is the object of the game.
It's amazing to me the kind of the powers of conformity. I mean, growing up, I think like you, really influenced by the counterculture for all its excesses and silliness, but really having a kind of distrust of conformity and of and this having this idea of independent ideas, which have been incorporated into consumer culture as well, of course, and then initially seeing the internet as being an intensification of that kind of difference making and resistance and individuality and singularity. And I mean, so much of the social function of technologies today I only experience as a tremendous force of conformity that reminds me, frankly, of high school. It doesn't seem it doesn't seem like the kind of conformity even where people are trying to get you all onto some new, ethical religion or something that's like they think is going to change the world. It's really more like a kind of herd. And, I understand that for many people it's clearly a source of excitement and novelty, and it's how they live, et cetera, et cetera. But I very much experience the kind of challenges that you're talking about. But it's the conformity of it really blows me away, that people don't see these technologies as giving them tools to create the kind of life that they want, including the wonderful life where you turn it off.
Well, that's funny, Eric, because it actually is kind of like religion in that if if you look at Facebook as like the Bible, and you look at how the Bible had that same effect, right? It makes people form communities into churches, and if you don't go to church, you're like an outsider, and everyone's like, what is your problem? It's like deleting friends from Facebook or not being on Facebook. If you don't go to church, people look down on it, and people look to Facebook for like what they should do, kind of like they do to the Bible. I mean, the Bible would be that literary equivalent, and how it was like controlled, you know, by certain people, and only certain people in the church could read, and Latin and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's a little bit scary how similar it's like recapitulating itself on Facebook and forcing people into these weird communities where they're going to conform to different thoughts that are put out on it, and then if they don't participate, they're seen as like weirdos or something.
Yeah, I mean, it's partly because, I mean, and not to get all, you know, Marxist on your ass or something, but it's partly because we didn't take into account the effects of the market. You know, it seemed as if the net would be a way of interacting through a new mass medium that was outside the market. It wasn't about selling and buying and advertising and all that. And now we see that the net is actually, in some ways, the greatest amplification of the market and the marketplace that there's ever been. And instead of it being used to develop the new peer-to-peer forms of value exchange that would crash the traditional centralized monopoly scarcity market, it's become a way of reifying that market's dominance over our lives and over the way we think. So for me, every time all those obnoxious pings, I can't help but trace back to the market, to someone trying to make money off this thing or sell something to someone else. And the ultimate conformity is that somehow is that, you know, growing the economy is a prerequisite for sustainable living when it's not.
Right. I have we've brought up the subject of religion a couple of times already, and I know you one of my favorite of your books is your book on Judaism and the idea of open source religion. I'm curious, when you think about the kind of values and ethics that we need to be developing in order to continue this dance with technology in a reasonably pleasant way, what role religion or post-religion or the sort of more than rational ethic world has to play in that process, or even how it plays for you personally as you try to engage with these issues and keep your mind and heart open?
Well, I mean, I've never liked religions because I always think of religions as the things that come about after the insight, that usually do as much to obscure the core insight as preserve it. For me, I mean, Judaism is the one I know best, and at its core, Judaism seems to be about maintaining not critical distance, but maintaining a critical framework, is being able to think critically about the world we live in order to make it better. It's revolutionary in that sense, and I feel like those kinds of awarenesses end up usually sacrificed to the requirements of whether it's nation state or maintaining institutions or proselytizing, and then the sort of the mythologies which were meant to communicate a core value end up serving a kind of the purpose of historicity instead of transmission of value, and the whole thing kind of collapses on itself. And I don't yet see the net promoting that open source sensibility, that discussion. So far, it's more about data gathering, which is still good. You can get a hold of the texts and look at them yourself. I mean, it's Gutenberg on steroids in that respect, and get any translation you want of this or that, and have something translate your Sanskrit for you as you go, which is all good. But the net is when it's working, the net is a fluid place. So I feel like people are better off with those sort of more original, the more original command lines of these religious faiths than they are with the sort of the whole thing, than the whole.
Sure, but
well, and one of the things that I think is kind of involved in that's interesting is that one thing that religions do is they train your mind, right? Like in a lot of these religious disciplines, they do involve programming pretty directly. I mean, any of the meditation disciplines and all that are exactly programming your mind into doing certain habits. So even though there is that like unseemly part of religion which does cause conformity, through the actual practice of some of the techniques and the training, like you're actually, making your brain do these certain habits which are programming it into something. And if we can just take that aspect of it instead of programming in like that, judgment and, kind of apocalyptic things, you can actually use those techniques in a very good way to actually achieve some kind of alchemical programming for your brain.
Right. I mean, that's why in some ways, I never knew how to feel about those little bracelets that I see Christian kids wearing, what would Jesus do?
Right.
But I kind of like what would Jesus do better than, this is what Jesus did for you. He died for your sins. It's just like, wow, that this is basically an in-the-moment way of making more loving choices. It's like, whoa, it's kind of fractal net era, to the max on that level. But yeah, I definitely buy that. In Judaism, because they didn't really have a strong belief set. Judaism was basically a set of behaviors or mitzvah.
Right, like devaning and stuff like that.
Right, a set of behaviors and a way of relating to other people. If you're going to get a contra, then you got to pay it overnight. All of these things that what makes you Jewish is, are you practicing this in life?
Yeah.
Even though we didn't have very and Tai Chi, with these, it was a yoga of its own.
There's
a secular yoga.
And deafening is certainly meditation, so similar. Yeah.
That's true. And these things, if you recognize them as, and I don't want to dash anything, or get controversial, but if you recognize them as social constructions rather than as literally from God, or if you look at them as Qigong is really cool, but it was a bunch of monks in some monastery that figured it out, over centuries. If you understand them as ways, as practices, not as the thing in itself, then you're programming again, rather than just being programmed. Then you're at least consciously choosing your channel before you accept your programming.
What's one of the things that you see right now happening online or in sort of digital technology that's really inspiring for you? Like something that's like, now that's something that's developing. It's a new space, but it's really taking into account some of these self-reflective and also creative programming strategies.
I don't know if you'll like this one because it's a commerce thing, but peer-to-peer currencies are really interesting to me. People taking the basic concept of local currency and kind of scaling them up for the net. Because that shows that people understand that money is a program, that the kind of money we use was made by certain people at a certain moment in history to promote certain kinds of behaviors and beliefs, and that there were once many other kinds of monies with many other kinds of operating systems, and that we can compete with money. We can use other kinds of monies. And so, there's things out there. One of them, I'm going to join up with these guys, I think. It's something called Superfluid. And they're just looking at how do we promote exchange and transaction between people without anyone having to borrow cash from the bank. And it's not that hard to do. So that's a really promising area for me. I like Etsy. I like when people just, I'm in my house, I'm making stuff, and other people will buy it. We don't need all these middlemen to do it. I like the publisher of this book. It's called Or Books, and their whole purpose is, let's not go to, through the traditional distribution channels that suck out 90% of the value that we've just created. If we have a net, can't people just buy books from us?
Yeah. Tell me more about Or Books. I know that we've thought a lot about publishing along with everything else. What is it about their approach that you like? What's the specific?
Well, I wanted to say, there's a few things. One, I was sick of my books costing $28 and then $32 after shipping. especially when I'm trying to sell to a young and student and counterculture artsy audience. So if you cut out all those middlemen, I can charge less than half, books like $16 instead of God knows what. That's always nice. I liked the idea that, if we choose not to go, if you use the Google search window instead of the Amazon search window, you can save $15. Is that worth it? I think it is. And I wanted to see if other people would too. You know what I mean? It's like, what value is that aggregator creating? And can't that aggregator just be aggregated by someone else? That can't we, rather than use the net to prop up the same old centralized monopolies, can't we use the net to transact in a peer-to-peer fashion? It's like everything's supposed to be peer-to-peer except our exchange of value, our actual exchange of money, which we're supposed to do through, eBay and Amazon and everything else. And it's like, well, maybe not. Maybe we could do this differently. And plus, I was looking at the sort of the 2 years that it takes for a book to come out and wondering, well, what parts of this are essential and what aren't? And it started to look more and more like there's a whole bunch of players in the distribution chain who are justifying their jobs by requiring you to take the 2 months to go through their part of the process. But what are they really doing? All these people and all that stuff are getting, 110 books into Barnes & Nobles across the country? Is that really worth that extra year? I don't think so.
That's wonderful. What else are you doing these days? I know you always have your hands in many pies. We got to wrap up soon, but I want to let you tell folks some of your other doings.
God, what am I doing? I just decided to pick up I'm going to do a conference in New York that you're going to be invited to. I think it's next November. It's kind of supposed to be a secret, but because I haven't really come up with a name, I wanted to call it Mutate, but maybe I'm going to call it Friend. That's basically looking at social media as the evolution of the organism rather than social media as ways of selling things to people. So I kind of want to do this conference. It's like, look, let's just do it. Let's just meet here, kind of like DisinfoCon was, except with a little bit more direct purpose. Let's just come together and let's just declare this is our medium, and what do we want to do with it? Where are we taking the species? So I want to do that, and I'm thinking about doing a book, something about time, the way time has collapsed and what that means. And I'm just, doing my stuff. I want to do a radio show. I got to find out how you guys do this one. Maybe I could come on to your network and be a... Yeah,
I'm a big PRN fan. It's a really good shop. And I know you've done some radio before, and you're a really good interviewer too. I've always enjoyed your other media things. So that's good. How do you feel your sense of time changing right now? Like in your life right now? What are you noticing, even compared with 5 years ago or 10 years ago?
It's really this sense that it's so imperative to know what's going on now. This focus on the topical moment is really annoying to me, this sense of having to keep up with this now. And the now that they're talking about is not really my now. It's someone else's now. It's like, so what? So Beatles on iTunes. And it's like, if I don't know that, it's like then I'm not caught up with the moment. What is that?
If you can take that down, I'll be so happy.
You know what I mean? It's like Steve Jobs is friggin' boomer Beatles. It's like, can we get now? Are we done with the Beatles? Are we done with them finally? Can we move on? God, the boomers, just leave us.
No, they'll leave us eventually, and then we'll be next. All right. Well, thank you so much, Doug, for joining us. This was a wonderful conversation.
Thanks for having me. We'll continue it.
Best of luck.
Okay, you guys be good.
You too.
Okay, from me and Maja, keep your minds open.